Did my best. Good morning, and it's Bible study time. And before we start, I have to go back and clarify a couple of things because I got my brain scattered last week and got a little confused about some stuff. They were at Capernaum when they got in the boat to go to the other side. They went from the north shore over to more in the eastern direction of the shore of the Sea of Galilee. I was thinking about and being on Tiberias, and I think I didn't communicate that well. I was thinking, oh, well, it's the Sea of Tiberias. We were in Tiberias, and we went to, well, west of Capernaum, where the ruins of Capernaum are. So they went up in the hill, not to be confused with the Jesus taking the crowd up in and teaching the Sermon on the Mount. He went up there, they were teaching, and the crowd followed him all the way around the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And they ended up then being there, and Jesus wanted to feed them. So the feeding of the 5,000. Today, we pick up later on in chapter 6, verses 16 through 21. And we get to the place where we see that time for them to go back. After Jesus had dismissed the crowd, he went on up into the mountain to the north, up into the hills, to pray. And he told the disciples, you need to go back. You need to get on the boat and go back. So we're not really sure what happened here. We know the synoptics tell this story that we're going to look at today. And in this, a couple of the synoptics tell it. And in this, we're going to see where the disciples go back to Capernaum on the journey in the boat. The storm rises. There's a lot of confusion among scholars. Did they go over to Bethsaida, which is, like a halfway point between where they were and back to Capernaum? Did they go there and thinking maybe Jesus would meet them there? And then when he didn't, they were sailing back to Capernaum. We don't know. We don't know all the little details about it or what really happened, other than the story that John tells us. And his version of it is the one that we get. And you might say, well, why did John not have Peter getting out of the boat and walking to Jesus? I don't know, other than it didn't fit the narrative of what he wanted to tell in the story. And the thing that at least our lesson writer today is saying to us is the sign of the presence of Jesus, the sign of his presence. And in his presence, we have no need to fear. And that's what we can learn from this passage. So the greatest comfort in life is to not have fears, isn't it? To know that there's peace around you, to know that you have a peace in your heart, to know that you don't have to worry. You don't have to be caught up in things, that everything is good. So we look at these verses, chapter 6 through verse 16 through 18. And here's what it says. When the evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. Darkness had already set in, but Jesus had not yet come to them. A high wind arose, and the sea began to churn. Here's up here, wrong side, right there. Number 1 says storms will rise. And that's a good point, isn't it? Storms do rise in life, don't they? And I don't know if here it is. It's after 10 on Sunday, and I've already faced 2 or 3 storms. But that's the way it is, isn't it? That's the way life is. Storms will rise. So they came down from the hill country. They got on the boat. Jesus had told them to go back, and they set sail. They got out. Whether they stopped along the way or not, it's not pertinent to the story for John's view. They went. Jesus didn't meet them anywhere. He's not with them. They're going along, and the storm rises. And storms in life can be very, they can catch us off guard sometimes, can't they? That's the way it is there. Just let me remind you of a couple of things. The Sea of Galilee is really not much more than a big lake. 13 miles long, north to south at the longest point. 8 miles wide east to west at its widest point. And so it's not very big, but it is 700 feet below sea level. and every point around it is maybe as high as 1,500 feet above sea level. So you can imagine it's kind of down in there, and kind of a wind tunnel. They call these the, it's like in the desert. Scirocco winds can just come rolling through there and really stir things up. Well, that's the way it is here. These winds come from the west ordinarily, and they roll down the plain or down the hills, and they roll down into this valley, and it can just build steam, and the winds can drive you crazy before you know it. So it was dark, and back in those days when it was dark, it was dark. We're not even told that there were any stars out that night. It was dark, and they may have been a little confused about where they were. The wind may have blown them off course a little bit. It's when you're out on a lake, sometimes it's hard to see where you are, what you're doing, where you need to be. And so you just need to kind of follow those things. So that was the story that was going on. High winds arose, sea began to churn, and the waters grew rough. And I'm sure they weren't too concerned about it at this point, because remember, 4 of the disciples were fishermen. They had boats. They were out there all the time. They knew what they were doing. And they probably calmed the others to say, it's okay, it's all right. Now, we have in Matthew, I believe it's chapter 8, the story where they're out on the boat and Jesus goes to sleep in the boat and a storm comes up. And he sleeps right through it. And they get a little bit unnerved that not only that the storm is there, but that Jesus isn't helping them. They're bailing on their own. And then they wake Jesus and he says, you have little faith. And then he tells the storm to be still, and it does. That's what he commands. And then Matthew says, and they wondered, what manner of man is this? What manner of man is Jesus? Well, we see that in this story. It's one of the miracles that John includes in his gospel. He doesn't indicate that they were frightened out there on the water. It just tells us that the storm came up. And so we move on. Verses 19 through 20 then tells us Jesus comes. He comes to them. And it says to us, after they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea. He was coming near the boat. Now they're afraid. But he said to them, it is I. Don't be afraid. It is I. Some would say that might be one of the I am statements. John uses several I am, like, and I think in chapter 7 we're going to see, and maybe we may not even get to that, but I am the bread of life. I am the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus says. So there's some I am statements that are like when Moses saw the burning bush. He was in the wilderness, and God said, well, he asked God, who should I say sent me when you send me back to Egypt to bring the people out? Whom I say that sent me? And God said, I am, where we get our term Yahweh, that God is. He just exists. He is who he is. Or some would even translate, he said to Moses, I am that I am. Okay, so they've gone out a little ways. They rode about 3 or 4 miles. Does that mean they were about halfway where they were going? Might even mean they were closer to Capernaum than they even knew, because going across the kind of the northeast tip of the lake to the northwest tip of the lake, they were just kind of going over there. They may not have known exactly where they were, but Jesus comes to them. And what's he doing? He's walking on the water. Don't buy this nonsense from people that says, oh, well, here's the deal. He was so close to the shore that he was, stepping on the rocks. No, that's not it. If he were stepping on the rocks, I believe John would have said, he's stepping on the rocks. No, John said, we're out in the water. And sometimes you might have to get out a little ways to kind of get your bearings. So I don't think they were that close to the shore. I think they were out and they were looking and they were trying to figure out exactly where we are in the middle of this storm when here comes Jesus. and he's walking on the water. Now, we know a couple of the other synoptics tell the story. And Peter said, if it's you, Lord, bid me to come to you, ask me to come out. And the Lord said, come. And Peter stepped out. And as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he didn't sink. But once he got a little bit weary about, whoa, what's happening here? And he looked down, or he looked away from Jesus. Then he began to sink. And then he cried out, save me, Lord. But we are not told that in John's gospel, if that happened in this story. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Why wouldn't John include the thing about Peter? We don't know. We just know that if it was the same incident, then Jesus is the key figure. He's the one who is walking on the water. He's the one who is taking care of them. It is his presence that they need to see. That's the sign of where they are. All right. And then we go to verse 21 of chapter 6. Says, then they were willing to take him on board, and at once the boat was at the shore where they were heading. And the point, Jesus sees us through. He sees us through. Even when we don't know he's near. Had Jesus been watching them for a while? I think so. Had Jesus been able to see and know that they were in trouble on the lake? Maybe. He certainly knew the people were hungry and they needed to be fed, didn't he? Jesus knows. And so he sees us through. They were willing to take him on board. Once they knew it was him, get him in the boat, take him on. A recurring theme in John's gospel is that true belief is more than intellectual assent. Pisteuo, that word for I believe or I have faith, is more than just saying something subjective. It is an extremely objective term that says my faith is such that I'm going to act upon it. My belief in the fact that Jesus is who he says he is that I'm convinced, and nothing's going to change me from that. I'm totally convinced. I know exactly what's going to happen. And Jesus is going to see me through. And he did. And then the surprising thing about that is that once it happened, it says that, Jesus got in the boat and then they're at the dock. Did Jesus hurry them along? Maybe. We don't know. So many questions we can't answer about it because we weren't there. John was. He certainly knew. And he included the things that he believed would help us to understand that the presence of Jesus was with them. And matter of fact, Jesus would do anything to get to them when he knew that they were in need. And so that's something that we can take to heart, isn't it? That even when we are in need, even when we may not even be aware of our needs, Jesus will get to us if we'll call upon him. He'll get to us if we'll be reminded of his presence always being near. So great lesson. It's a good one. With that, time to go. God bless y'all. Hope you have a great week. Bye-bye.